History teaches us that great empires are rarely destroyed by invaders from the outside. They are destroyed by the poison spreading from within. While Vladimir Putin obsessed over NATO in the West, he ignored the earthquake rumbling beneath his feet in the south and east. The Russian world is dying, and from its ashes, a new power is rising, the Turkic world. From the steppes of Kazakhstan to the oil fields of Tatarstan, from the mountains of Chechnya to the frozen lands of Yakutia, the people Moscow oppressed for centuries are waking up. Today, we expose the nightmare scenario the Kremlin fears most, the collision of Putin's fading empire with the rising reality of the Great Turan. We are talking about a 200 million strong demographic tsunami from the south, banging on the door just as the silent Chinese invasion tightens its grip on the east. Welcome back to MrWARLOG. For centuries, Russia has been known as the prison of nations, a vast empire holding hundreds of ethnic groups captive under the rule of Moscow. But today, the prison guards are gone. They are dying in the trenches of Ukraine, and the prisoners are realizing the door is unlocked. Charter 97 reports a historic development. Ukraine's military intelligence, GUR, has officially formed a union of indigenous peoples. Tatars, Bashkirs, Buryats, and Chechens are now fighting against Moscow under their own flags. This is not just a military unit, it is a political bomb. It is the beginning of the decolonization of Russia. Before we dive into how Kazakhstan cut off Russia's oil and how Turkey is arming the region with drones, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. You are witnessing the end of an era. Let's look at the geopolitical map. It has changed. Lansing Institute calls it a new strategic axis. The Organization of Turkic States, OTS, is no longer just a cultural club. It is becoming a military and economic bloc that directly challenges Russia's dominance in its own backyard. For 200 years, Central Asia was Moscow's property. Now, it is looking to Ankara. The Times of Central Asia describes this as Turkey's Turkic gambit. While Russia is weak, Turkey is filling the vacuum. They are building schools, roads, and most importantly, armies. This is the post-colonial revolt. These nations are realizing they don't need Moscow to survive. In fact, Moscow is dragging them down. The shift isn't just on land. It's on the water. The Caspian Sea used to be a Russian lake. Not anymore. The Central Asia Caucasus analyst reports that Turkey-backed Turkic states are challenging Russia's hegemony. Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan are building their own fleets, powered by Turkish technology. Why does this matter? Because the Caspian is the gateway for energy. If Russia loses control here, it loses control over the energy flow from Asia to Europe. The middle corridor bypasses Russia entirely, making Moscow irrelevant in global trade. And speaking of energy, let's talk about the biggest betrayal Putin has faced from an ally, Kazakhstan. Upstream Online confirms that Kazakhstan is boosting oil exports to China, bypassing the traditional Russian routes. For decades, Russia held Kazakhstan hostage by controlling its pipelines. Now Astana is saying, no more. They are sending their oil east to China and west to Europe via Azerbaijan. This is an economic disaster for the Kremlin. They lose transit fees, they lose leverage, and they lose face. The energy weapon Putin tried to use against Europe has backfired, and now his neighbors are disarming him. How did these Central Asian states get so brave? Because they have new weapons. Forbes details Turkey's drone diplomacy. Kyrgyzstan used Turkish drones to win its border conflicts. Azerbaijan used them to reclaim Karabakh. Now Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are buying them. These countries are replacing Soviet-era Russian weapons with modern Turkish tech. They are interoperable with NATO standards, not Russian ones. Strategically, Central Asia is integrating into a NATO-adjacent defense architecture, leaving Russia isolated in the cold. But the threat isn't just from independent states. It's inside Russia's own borders. Let's look at Chechnya. Putin thinks Ramzan Kadyrov controls Chechnya, but Charter 97 reports a growing insurgency. Chechen fighters in Ukraine are not just fighting for Kiev, they are preparing to liberate Grozny. This is a Chechen civil war waiting to happen. On one side, Kadyrov's TikTok army. On the other, battle-hardened veterans fighting for independence. If Kadyrov falls, the North Caucasus explodes. And with the Russian army busy in Ukraine, There is no one left to stop a third Chechen war. Why would these regions revolt? Because Moscow is bankrupting them. The Moscow Times reports a dire situation. 6 Russian regions have spent almost all their reserves and are on the verge of budget collapse. Imagine being a Tatar or a Yakut. You live on land full of oil and diamonds, but your streets are crumbling, your schools are cold, and your sons are sent to die in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Moscow takes all the revenue. This is the classic recipe for separatism. Why should we feed Moscow when Moscow feeds us only death? And who will fight to keep these regions? The ethnic Russians? They are disappearing. The Great Russian Brain Drain and the war casualties have decimated the ethnic Russian male population. The only growing demographic in Russia is the Muslim/Turkic population. In 20 years, Russia will look very different. The Russian world Putin dreams of will be a minority in its own country. The soldiers of the future Russian army will be named Mohammed and Chingiz, not Ivan and Sergei. Will they fight for Moscow? History suggests otherwise. The collapse is also physical. Forbes reports that thousands of trucks from China are stuck at the Kazakhstan border. Why? Because Kazakhstan is enforcing Western sanctions. The back door is closing. Russia is being strangled not just by the West, but by its own allies in Central Asia who fear secondary sanctions more than they fear Putin. And looming over all this is a new player in Washington. Reports suggest that Donald Trump is inviting Central Asian leaders to the US. He sees an opportunity. If the US recognizes the strategic importance of the Turkic belt as a counterweight to both Russia and China, we could see a massive geopolitical shift. A US-backed Great Turan would be the final nail in the coffin of Russian influence in Eurasia. The most powerful weapon Ukraine has given these indigenous peoples is not a gun. It is a voice. The soldiers of the Siberian Battalion and the Turan Battalion are recording videos in their native languages, Tatar, Bashkir, Yakut. They are sending a message home. This is a colonial war. Moscow is using us as cannon fodder. Wake up! This message is bypassing Kremlin censorship through Telegram and TikTok. It is waking up a national consciousness that was asleep for 100 years. We talked about drones, but Turkey's strategy goes much deeper. It is called the Turkish Gambit. The Times of Central Asia describes a silent revolution. While Russia is busy destroying cities in Ukraine, Turkey is building cities in Central Asia. Ankara isn't just selling weapons, it is exporting soft power. Turkish schools, Turkish TV series, Turkish construction companies. They are rebuilding the cultural identity of the region. For a young Uzbek or Kazakh today, the model of a modern, strong state is no longer Russia. It is Turkey. Ankara has successfully positioned itself as the big brother that Moscow used to be, but without the colonial arrogance. This is a battle for the hearts and minds, and Putin has already lost it. Now, let's look at the water again. The Caspian Sea. For 300 years, the Russian Navy ruled these waters. But today, KSE analyst reports that the Turkey-backed Turkic States have effectively challenged Russia's hegemony. How? By building a new logistical reality. Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan are building ports that bypass Russia entirely. They are creating a Turkic lake. Why is this fatal for Putin? Because the Caspian is the only route for Central Asian energy to reach Europe without going through Russia or Iran. By losing control of the sea, Russia loses its ability to turn off the tap. The energy blackmail weapon is broken. And it's not just the Turkic nations. Even the quietest neighbor is turning away. Look at Mongolia. Charter 97 reports that Russia is losing its market share even in Mongolia. But the real story is the pipeline. Putin desperately needs to build the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline through Mongolia to sell gas to China. But Ulaanbaatar is stalling. They are looking at the Turkic bloc. They are looking at the US. If Mongolia says no, Putin's plan to pivot to Asia collapses. He is surrounded by neighbors who smell his weakness. Now, let's go to the other side of the map, to Vladivostok. While we focus on ethnic republics, the Russian Far East is also waking up. Charter 97 reported the largest protests in years. Why? Because the heating systems collapsed. People are freezing in their homes while ships loaded with coal sail past their windows to China. This is the colonial reality of Putin's Russia. The resources of the Far East are sold to Beijing to fund a war in the West, while the locals freeze. This anger is fertile ground for separatism. The people of Vladivostok are asking, if Moscow takes everything and gives nothing, why do we need Moscow? The incompetence of the Russian state is visible from space. Just look at the border with Kazakhstan. Forbes confirms that thousands of trucks from China are stuck. Why? Because the Russian customs system has collapsed under the weight of corruption and inefficiency, and because Kazakhstan is enforcing sanctions. This is the logistical heart attack. Russia needs these goods to survive, but its own allies in Central Asia are tightening the noose. They are afraid of Western secondary sanctions more than they are afraid of Putin's anger. That is the ultimate loss of respect. This leads us to a psychological turning point. Insight Turkey analyzes the rise of post-colonialism in Central Asia. For the first time in 200 years, the stands, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, do not fear Russia. They see a Russia that cannot even conquer a small town in Donbass. They see a Russia that begs North Korea for shells. The psychological chains are broken. They are rewriting their history books to call the Russian Empire an invader, not a liberator. When you lose the fear, you lose the empire. Finally, let's look at the checkbook. Revolutions need money, but in Russia, the money is gone. The Moscow Times revealed that 6 Russian regions have exhausted their reserves. They are technically bankrupt. Who are these regions? They are often the ones with the highest ethnic minority populations. They are the ones sending the most soldiers to die. When the checks stop clearing, the loyalty stops. A bankrupt governor cannot stop a separatist movement. A bankrupt police force cannot stop a protest. Putin is sitting on a ticking time bomb of insolvency. Putin thought he could balance China against the West, but he forgot about the third player. Now Russia is squeezed between the economic giant, China, in the east, and the cultural military giant, the Turkic World, in the south. He has no moves left. If he leans to China, he becomes a vassal. If he fights the Turkic rise, he risks an internal explosion in his own Muslim republics. This is the checkmate of the century. We talked about the Great Turan, but there is one physical piece of the puzzle missing, and it is the most dangerous spot on Earth right now, the Zangezur corridor. For a century, Russia kept the Turkic world physically separated by drawing borders on a map. Now Azerbaijan, backed by Turkey, is pushing to open this corridor. If Zangezur opens, a truck can travel from Istanbul to Shanghai without ever entering Russia or Iran. It is the umbilical cord of the Turkic superpower. Moscow is terrified. Iran is terrified. Because once that road is paved, Russia's influence in the South Caucasus evaporates overnight. The Iron Curtain is being replaced by the Turkic Highway. This connects to the global picture, the Middle Corridor. For decades, the Northern Corridor through Russia was the main trade route between China and Europe. But sanctions killed it. Now the world is building the Middle Corridor. It goes through the Turkic States. It is faster, it is safer, and it is free from Russian blackmail. China is investing billions. The EU is investing billions. The world has decided that the future of trade does not include Russia. Putin isn't just losing land, he is being erased from the map of global logistics. Finally, the most symbolic death of the Russian Empire, the alphabet. Kazakhstan is switching to the Latin alphabet. Uzbekistan has already done it. Why does this matter? Because script is identity. By dumping the Cyrillic alphabet, these nations are mentally divorcing Moscow. They are aligning their culture, their internet, and their education with Ankara and the West. Putin speaks Russian, but the grandchildren of Central Asia will read and write in a script he doesn't understand. The mental empire is collapsing faster than the physical one. So let's fast forward. What does the map of Eurasia look like in 5 years? It doesn't look like the Russian Federation we know today. We might see a United States of Siberia under Chinese economic control. We might see an idle Ural Republic, Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, aligned with Turkey. We might see a North Caucasian emirate breaking away in blood and fire. The Great Turan is not just a dream of intellectuals in Ankara anymore. It is a geopolitical reality being forged in the vacuum of Russia's collapse. Putin went to war to recreate the Soviet Union. Instead, he has triggered the partition of Russia. What do you think? Is the breakup of Russia inevitable? Will we see a Turkic superpower emerge on the ruins of the Kremlin? I really want to hear your predictions. Drop a comment below. If you want to see the future before it happens, hit that like button and subscribe to MrWARLOG. We don't just report the news, we analyze history in the making. I am Charlie from the MrWARLOG team. Stay watchful. Thanks for viewing.